Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Jackson, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination etched across her weathered face. At 32, she was older than most recruits, her calloused hands telling stories of years spent working construction jobs to support her younger siblings after their parents died in a car accident. The other recruits barely glanced at her as they formed their first formation, most of them fresh-faced 18 and 19-year-olds who had never known real hardship. The South Carolina heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Drill Sergeant Thompson began his intimidating welcome speech. His voice boomed across the parade ground, echoing off the concrete buildings that would become their home for the next several months. Sarah listened intently, her brown eyes focused and alert, while some of the younger recruits shuffled nervously or whispered among themselves. During the first week of basic training, Sarah's differences became painfully obvious to everyone around her. While the other recruits struggled with the physical demands, she approached each challenge methodically, drawing on years of manual labor experience. Her form during push-ups was perfect, her endurance during long runs was remarkable, and her attention to detail during equipment inspections was meticulous. However, these strengths seemed to irritate rather than impress her fellow trainees. The mockery started subtly at first. Whispered comments about the old lady trying to prove herself. Snickers when she asked questions during instruction periods, genuine questions born from her desire to excel rather than ignorance. Private Johnson, a cocky kid from California who had played high school football, seemed to take particular pleasure in undermining her confidence. "Hey, Martinez," Johnson would call out during their rare free moments. "Maybe you should have joined the Army Reserves instead. This might be too intense for someone your age." His comments always drew laughs from his growing circle of followers, young men who seemed more interested in establishing social hierarchies than focusing on their training. Sarah never responded to these taunts directly. Instead, she channeled her frustration into her performance, pushing herself harder during physical training, studying longer into the night, and maintaining her equipment to standards that exceeded even the drill sergeant's expectations. Her discipline was unwavering, but the constant undermining began to take its toll on her confidence. The situation escalated during their third week when Combat Instructor Sergeant Davis arrived to begin their hand-to-hand combat training. Davis was a legend at Fort Jackson, a former Special Forces operator with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for breaking down the toughest recruits. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with arms like tree trunks and scars that told stories of real battles, he commanded immediate respect from everyone except those too foolish to recognize genuine danger. During their first combat training session, Davis demonstrated basic defensive techniques, his movements fluid despite his intimidating size. The recruits paired off to practice, and Sarah found herself partnered with Private Chen, a quiet young man from Oregon who had always been respectful toward her. As they worked through the techniques, Johnson and his group watched from nearby, their commentary becoming increasingly bold. "Look at Grandma trying to fight," Johnson whispered loudly enough for others to hear. "She's gonna break a hip." The laughter that followed was cruel and cutting, designed to humiliate rather than simply tease. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she continued practicing with Chen, her movements becoming more precise as her anger focused her concentration. She had learned these same techniques years ago during a self-defense course she had taken after working late shifts in dangerous neighborhoods, but she kept this knowledge to herself, not wanting to appear boastful or draw more negative attention. Davis noticed the dynamic developing within the group, his experienced eyes recognizing the signs of unit cohesion breaking down. He had seen it countless times before, the way insecurity and fear manifested as cruelty toward those perceived as different or weak. However, his assessment of Sarah was quite different from her tormentors. He saw her controlled breathing, her perfect stance, and the way she absorbed instruction without ego getting in the way. During the following days, the combat training intensified. Davis introduced more complex techniques, including grappling, striking combinations, and situational awareness exercises. Sarah excelled at each new challenge, her construction work having given her exceptional body awareness and core strength. Her hands, roughened by years of physical labor, gripped and struck with surprising power and precision. The mockery from Johnson's group became more vicious as Sarah's competence became impossible to ignore. They began targeting not just her age, but her background, her appearance, and her serious demeanor. "She probably thinks she's some kind of tough construction worker," Johnson said during chow one evening, speaking loudly enough for the entire mess hall to hear. But this is real military training, not playing with hammers and nails. Other recruits began to take sides, some defending Sarah quietly while others joined the harassment, either from genuine cruelty or simple desire to fit in with the dominant group. The division within their training company was becoming toxic, affecting morale and unit cohesion in ways that threatened their overall success. Sarah's response to the escalating harassment remained consistent. She focused on her training with laser-like intensity, spending extra time in the gym, studying field manuals during personal time, and maintaining her gear to standards that impressed even the most demanding instructors. Her performance in all areas of training placed her consistently in the top 10% of her class, but rather than earning respect, this success seemed to fuel more resentment. One particularly difficult day during their 5th week, the recruits were practicing advanced defensive scenarios. The temperature had climbed above 90 degrees, and the humidity made every movement feel like swimming through thick air. Several recruits had already been pulled aside for heat exhaustion symptoms, but the training continued at its relentless pace. Davis paired the recruits randomly for sparring exercises, each pair demonstrating techniques, while the rest of the company observed and learned. When Sarah's name was called, Johnson immediately volunteered to be her partner, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he anticipated the opportunity to humiliate her in front of everyone. "This should be interesting," he muttered as they moved to the center of the training area, loud enough for his friends to hear and laugh appreciatively. The other recruits formed a circle around them, some looking uncomfortable with the obvious setup while others anticipated the entertainment. Davis observed the pairing with interest, recognizing both the social dynamics at play and the potential for a valuable teaching moment. He had been watching Sarah carefully for weeks, noting her technical proficiency and controlled aggression during training exercises. He had also been monitoring Johnson's behavior, recognizing the type of insecure bully who often struggled when faced with real challenges. As the two recruits faced each other in the training circle, the atmosphere grew tense. Johnson bounced on his toes like a boxer, playing to his audience with exaggerated confidence. Sarah stood perfectly still, her breathing controlled and her eyes focused not on Johnson's face but on his center of gravity, watching for the subtle shifts that would telegraph his intentions. Davis called for them to begin with basic defensive postures, but Johnson immediately became more aggressive than the exercise required, throwing harder strikes and attempting techniques beyond their current skill level. Sarah absorbed his attacks calmly, deflecting and redirecting his energy while maintaining perfect form and control. The crowd of watching recruits began to murmur as it became clear that Sarah was not only holding her own, but actually controlling the pace of the engagement. Johnson's breathing became labored as he tried to overwhelm her with aggressive attacks, while Sarah remained calm and collected, seemingly able to predict and counter his every move. Davis watched the exchange with growing interest, recognizing in Sarah's movements the signs of someone who had received training beyond their basic military instruction. Her footwork was too precise, her defensive reactions too automatic, and her understanding of leverage and timing too advanced for a simple construction worker with no combat background. As the exercise continued, Johnson's frustration became obvious to everyone watching. His attacks grew wilder and less controlled as Sarah continued to neutralize his efforts with minimal apparent effort. The other recruits fell silent as they began to realize that their assumptions about both combatants had been completely wrong. The defining moment came when Johnson, desperate to assert his dominance, abandoned all technique and launched himself at Sarah in a wild tackle attempt. What happened next would become legendary among the training companies at Fort Jackson, a story told and retold with growing amazement and respect. Sarah's response was so quick and fluid that many observers initially missed exactly how it happened. She stepped slightly to one side, used Johnson's momentum against him, and applied a technique that sent him tumbling to the ground with surprising force. The impact knocked the wind out of him completely, leaving him gasping and stunned on the training mat. But it was what happened next that truly shocked everyone present and would change the entire dynamic of their training company forever. As Johnson lay on the ground trying to recover his breath, Sarah knelt beside him with genuine concern, checking to make sure he was not seriously injured and offering quiet words of encouragement that only he could hear. The combination of her devastating technical skill and immediate compassion created a moment of profound silence among the watching recruits. Even Davis, with all his combat experience and years of training soldiers, found himself impressed by the perfect balance of controlled aggression and human decency that Sarah had demonstrated. Johnson's eyes filled with tears as the reality of his situation became clear. He had been completely outclassed by the person he had been mocking and tormenting for weeks, and yet that same person was now showing him kindness and concern for his well-being. The emotional impact of this revelation overwhelmed him completely, and he began to cry openly as the full weight of his behavior and its consequences hit him all at once. The silence that followed Johnson's emotional breakdown was deafening. The entire training company stood frozen in place, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. Sarah remained kneeling beside Johnson, her hand resting gently on his shoulder as he struggled to control his tears and regulate his breathing. The transformation from confident bully to vulnerable young man was so complete and sudden that many recruits found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about both Johnson and Sarah. Davis stepped forward slowly, his experienced eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. In his 15 years of training soldiers, he had witnessed countless moments of triumph and defeat, but rarely had he seen such a perfect demonstration of true strength combined with genuine compassion. The technical skill Sarah had displayed was impressive enough, but her immediate shift to caretaker mode revealed a depth of character that commanded his deepest respect. "Everyone take a knee," Davis commanded, his voice carrying the authority that came from years of leading men and women in actual combat situations. The recruits quickly complied, forming a loose circle around Sarah and Johnson while maintaining respectful distance. The oppressive South Carolina heat seemed less important now as everyone focused on the unfolding drama before them. Johnson slowly sat up with Sarah's assistance, his face red with embarrassment and his eyes still glistening with unshed tears. The young man who had seemed so confident and aggressive just minutes before now appeared small and vulnerable, stripped of the bravado that had defined his identity since arriving at Fort Jackson. He looked up at Sarah with an expression that mixed shame, gratitude, and dawning respect. "I'm sorry," Johnson whispered, his voice barely audible even in the sudden quiet. "I'm so sorry for everything I said, everything I did. I thought you were weak because you were different, but I was the weak one." His words carried the weight of genuine remorse, the kind of emotional honesty that only comes from profound personal revelation. Sarah's response surprised everyone, including Davis. Instead of accepting the apology with stern dignity or using the moment to assert her dominance, she smiled with genuine warmth and extended her hand to help Johnson to his feet. "We all make mistakes when we're scared," she said quietly, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had faced real challenges and overcome them. "What matters is what we learn from them." As Johnson stood, Davis made a decision that would reshape the entire training experience for this company. He had been observing Sarah for weeks, noting details that the other recruits had missed in their rush to judge and categorize her. Her movements during combat training were too precise, her situational awareness too developed, and her understanding of tactical principles too advanced for someone with no military background. "Martinez," Davis called out, his voice carrying a tone of respect that had not been present before. "Step forward." Sarah rose smoothly and approached the instructor, her posture respectful but confident. The other recruits watched with intense curiosity, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. "Tell me about your background before joining the Army," Davis requested, though his tone made it clear this was more command than casual inquiry. "The real background, not just the construction work." His penetrating stare suggested he already suspected there was more to her story than anyone realized. Sarah hesitated for a moment, glancing around at the faces of her fellow recruits before meeting Davis's expectant gaze. She had kept her past private not from shame, but from a desire to start fresh, to be judged on her performance rather than her history. However, the events of the past few minutes had changed the dynamics of their training company in ways that made continued secrecy counterproductive. "I served 4 years in the Marine Corps," Sarah began, her voice steady and clear. "2 deployments to Afghanistan, military police specialty with additional training in close-quarters combat and prisoner handling." The revelation hit the assembled recruits like a physical blow, causing several of them to gasp audibly and others to exchange shocked glances. "I left the service 8 years ago when my parents died and I needed to take care of my younger siblings," Sarah continued, her explanation matter-of-fact rather than seeking sympathy. I worked construction because it paid well and gave me flexibility to be there for my family. When my youngest brother graduated high school last year and my sister got married, I decided it was time to continue my military service. The implications of this revelation rippled through the group of recruits as they began to understand the true magnitude of their misjudgments. Sarah was not an inexperienced civilian struggling to adapt to military life. She was a combat veteran with more real-world experience than most of their instructors. The techniques she had demonstrated during their sparring session were not beginner's luck, but the result of years of training and actual combat application. Davis nodded slowly, processing this information with the analytical mind of a professional soldier. "What was your rank when you left the Corps?" he asked, though his tone suggested he was already forming conclusions about Sarah's military record. "Staff sergeant," Sarah replied simply. "I was selected for promotion to gunnery sergeant, but left before it was official." This additional detail caused even more shock among the listening recruits, as they realized that Sarah outranked most of the drill sergeants who had been training them and possessed leadership experience they could barely imagine. Johnson, still standing near Sarah, looked as though he might be sick. The full scope of his behavior over the past weeks was becoming clear to him, and the shame he felt was overwhelming. He had been mocking and attempting to intimidate someone who possessed more military experience and combat credentials than he could hope to achieve in years of service. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" asked Private Chen, his voice filled with genuine curiosity rather than accusation. The quiet young man had always treated Sarah with respect, but even he was struggling to process this new information about his training partner. Sarah considered the question carefully before responding. "Because I wanted to earn your respect as who I am now, not who I used to be," she explained. "I've been out of the service for 8 years. I needed to prove to myself that I could still meet the standards, that I hadn't lost what made me a good soldier. Coming back at my age, starting over, that takes a different kind of courage than joining straight out of high school." Davis found himself nodding in approval at this response. He had encountered other veterans returning to service after civilian careers, and he understood the unique challenges they faced. Sarah's decision to conceal her background showed both humility and genuine commitment to personal growth, qualities that marked exceptional soldiers. "The technique you just demonstrated," Davis continued, his professional curiosity overriding protocol. "Where did you learn that specific combination?" His question was directed at Sarah, but his eyes swept the assembled recruits, using this teachable moment to maximum advantage. "Marine Corps martial arts program, combined with some additional training I received during deployment," Sarah answered. "We worked closely with special operations teams, and they shared some techniques that aren't in the standard curriculum. That particular move is designed to neutralize an aggressive opponent quickly, while minimizing injury risk." The educational value of this exchange was not lost on Davis or the more perceptive recruits. They were receiving advanced tactical instruction from someone with actual combat experience, learning techniques and principles that typically took years to master. Sarah's impromptu lesson was worth more than weeks of standard training exercises. Private Williams, one of Johnson's former followers, raised his hand tentatively. "Staff Sergeant Martinez," he began, then stopped, unsure of proper protocol for addressing a former senior enlisted person who was now technically a peer. His confusion was understandable as the situation was unprecedented in his limited military experience. "Just Sarah is fine," she said with a slight smile, recognizing his discomfort and choosing to ease rather than exploit it. "We're all privates here, learning together." Her response demonstrated the kind of leadership maturity that comes only from real experience managing soldiers in challenging situations. Davis made another decision that would significantly impact their remaining training time. "Martinez, I want you to assist with combat instruction for the remainder of our training cycle," he announced. "Your experience and skills are resources this company can benefit from." The assignment was both recognition of her abilities and acknowledgement that her secret was now fully revealed. The atmosphere among the recruits began to shift dramatically as the implications of Sarah's background became fully clear. Those who had participated in mocking her were now dealing with feelings of shame and embarrassment, while others who had remained neutral were beginning to see her in an entirely new light. The social dynamics that had dominated their training experience were being completely restructured. Johnson approached Sarah again, his earlier tears replaced by determined resolve. "I want to learn from you," he said, his voice stronger now, but still carrying the humility that comes from profound personal revelation. I want to understand what real strength looks like, what real leadership means. I've been acting like a child, and I want to grow up. Sarah studied his face for a moment, evaluating the sincerity of his request. She had dealt with many young soldiers during her previous service, and she understood that genuine change was possible when someone was truly motivated to improve. Leadership isn't about intimidating people or making them feel small, she told him. It's about making everyone around you better, stronger, more capable than they thought possible. The lesson continued as Davis restructured their training session to take advantage of Sarah's unexpected expertise. She demonstrated techniques with precision and patience, explaining not just the physical movements but the tactical thinking behind each application. Her teaching style was markedly different from the drill sergeant's, focused on understanding rather than mere repetition. As the afternoon progressed, the other recruits began to open up to Sarah in ways that had been impossible when they saw her as an outsider. They asked questions about combat experience, sought advice on military career decisions, and gradually began to treat her as the experienced soldier she had always been, rather than the struggling recruit they had imagined. The transformation was particularly evident in Johnson, who threw himself into learning with the same intensity he had previously applied to social dominance. His natural athletic ability, combined with Sarah's expert instruction and his newfound humility, made him a surprisingly quick student. The dynamic between them evolved from antagonistic to genuinely collaborative in the span of a single afternoon. Davis observed these changes with professional satisfaction, recognizing that his training company was becoming stronger and more unified than most groups achieved even by graduation. Sarah's revelation had not only ended the toxic social dynamics, but had actually created opportunities for accelerated learning and development that would benefit everyone involved. As the day's training concluded and the recruits prepared to return to their barracks, the conversation continued in small groups. Stories were shared, apologies were offered, and new relationships began to form based on mutual respect rather than perceived hierarchies. The mockery and division that had characterized their early weeks were being replaced by genuine camaraderie and shared purpose. The weeks following Sarah's revelation transformed the entire atmosphere of Training Company Delta. What had once been a fractured group divided by petty rivalries and cruel hierarchies became a cohesive unit focused on mutual improvement and shared success. The change was so dramatic that other training companies began to notice, and instructors from across Fort Jackson started visiting their sessions to observe the remarkable dynamics at work. Sarah's new role as assistant combat instructor brought out leadership qualities that had been dormant during her years in civilian life. She approached each recruit as an individual, identifying their specific strengths and weaknesses while developing personalized training strategies that maximize their potential. Her patient teaching style and genuine concern for everyone's improvement created an environment where learning flourished and confidence grew. Johnson's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable of all. The young man who had once used cruelty and intimidation to mask his own insecurities now channeled that same energy into becoming Sarah's most dedicated student and eventually her informal second-in-command. He spent hours after official training sessions practicing techniques, studying manuals, and working with struggling recruits who needed extra attention. "I was so afraid of looking weak," Johnson confided to Sarah one evening as they cleaned equipment after a particularly intensive training day. "My dad was this tough guy who never showed emotion, never admitted mistakes. I thought being strong meant making other people feel small." His voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom, the kind that comes only through genuine self-reflection and growth. Sarah listened without judgment, recognizing in his story echoes of her own younger self. "Real strength," she told him, "is making the people around you stronger. It's about building others up, not tearing them down. Your father might not have known that, but you can choose to be different." Her words carried the authority of someone who had learned these lessons through years of leading soldiers in life-and-death situations. The impact of Sarah's teaching extended far beyond combat techniques. She shared stories from her deployments that illustrated principles of leadership, teamwork, and moral courage under pressure. These were not abstract concepts from textbooks, but real experiences involving split-second decisions, life-or-death consequences, and the bonds that form between soldiers who depend completely on each other. During one memorable session, Sarah described a firefight in Afghanistan where her small team had been pinned down by enemy forces in a compound that offered no easy escape routes. "We had a new guy with us," she explained to the gathered recruits, "fresh out of training, scared out of his mind, and making mistakes that could have gotten us all killed." The recruits listened with rapt attention, understanding that they were receiving instruction that could not be found in any manual. The easy thing would have been to write him off, maybe even abandon him to save the rest of us. Sarah continued, "But that's not who we were, and it's not who you're training to become. We worked as a team, covered his mistakes, gave him confidence, and got everyone home safe. That young soldier went on to become one of the best Marines I ever served with, but only because his team believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself." These stories resonated deeply with recruits who were struggling with their own fears and insecurities. Private Martinez, a quiet young woman from Texas who had been considering dropping out of training, found new determination after hearing about Sarah's deployment experiences. "If she can lead soldiers through combat," Martinez told her bunkmate, "then I can handle a few more weeks of basic training." Davis recognized the exceptional development occurring within his company and began incorporating Sarah's methods into the broader curriculum. Her emphasis on building mental resilience alongside physical capability was producing recruits who were not only technically proficient, but also emotionally mature and ethically grounded. These were the qualities that distinguished good soldiers from great ones. The transformation was not limited to individual recruits, but extended to the company as a whole. Where once there had been cliques and social hierarchies, now there was genuine teamwork and mutual support. Stronger recruits helped struggling ones without being asked. Equipment was shared freely, and everyone took responsibility for the success of the entire group. This spirit of cooperation was put to the test during their final field training exercise, a week-long simulation designed to evaluate everything they had learned during basic training. Companies were judged on their ability to work together under pressure, solve complex problems, and maintain discipline in challenging conditions. Training Company Delta's performance during this exercise became legendary at Fort Jackson. The scenario involved a simulated enemy attack on their base camp during the second night of the exercise. In the darkness and confusion, with drill sergeants acting as opposing forces and blank ammunition creating realistic battle sounds, many companies dissolved into chaos. Individual recruits focused on their own survival rather than unit objectives. Communication broke down, and leadership hierarchies collapsed under pressure. Training Company Delta's response was markedly different. Sarah's emphasis on teamwork and mutual responsibility had created bonds that held strong even under simulated combat stress. Johnson, who had once been motivated primarily by personal glory, now focused entirely on coordinating his squad's response and ensuring no one was left behind. The lessons learned through months of patient instruction and personal growth were now being applied in exactly the situations they had been designed for. When the exercise concluded and the evaluating instructors compiled their reports, Training Company Delta had achieved scores that surpassed anything seen at Fort Jackson in recent memory. More importantly, they had done so while demonstrating the kind of unit cohesion and individual character that marked truly exceptional military units. The graduation ceremony for Training Company Delta drew unusual attention from base leadership and visiting officials who had heard about their remarkable development. As Sarah stood in formation with her fellow recruits, now all wearing the uniform with pride and confidence that had been earned through genuine achievement, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. Colonel Peterson, the base commander, delivered the graduation address with specific reference to Training Company Delta's exceptional performance. "You have demonstrated that true military excellence comes not from individual achievement but from collective commitment to shared values," he told the assembled graduates and their families. "You have learned lessons about leadership, courage, and service that will serve you well throughout your careers and your lives." Following the ceremony, Sarah was approached by several senior officers who had been observing her company's progress. Major Williams, a career infantry officer with multiple combat deployments, extended his hand with obvious respect. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, "I understand you're planning to return to military police specialty. I want you to know that my unit would be honored to have someone with your leadership abilities and experience." The offer was flattering, but Sarah had already made her decision about her future assignment. She had requested placement as a drill instructor at Fort Jackson, wanting to continue the work she had discovered during basic training. "I think I can do the most good right here," she told the major, helping other recruits discover their potential and learn what it really means to be a soldier. Johnson, who had also received multiple assignment offers based on his remarkable transformation and performance, made a similar decision. He requested assignment to the same training unit as Sarah, recognizing that he still had much to learn about leadership and wanting to continue developing under her guidance. As the families departed and the new graduates prepared for their advanced training assignments, Davis approached Sarah with a proposal that would formalize her impact on future training cycles. "The command wants to implement your teaching methods across all training companies," he explained. "They're offering you a position developing curriculum and training other instructors in your techniques." Sarah considered the offer carefully, understanding both the honor it represented and the responsibility it would entail. The approach she had developed was not simply a collection of techniques, but a philosophy of leadership based on respect, patience, and genuine concern for the development of others. Teaching other instructors to implement these methods would require careful attention to the underlying principles, not just the surface behaviors. "I'll accept," Sarah decided, "but only if I can continue working directly with recruits as well. The classroom instruction is important, but the real learning happens when you're actually leading and developing soldiers." The channel seemed to be a condition from the someone who understood that leadership could not be taught entirely through theory, but required practical application and ongoing refinement. The impact of Sarah's transformation from mocked outsider to respected leader extended far beyond Training Company Delta. Her story spread throughout the military training community, inspiring other instructors to examine their own methods and assumptions. The young recruit who had once hidden her background to avoid judgment had become a symbol of the potential that exists within every soldier when they are given appropriate guidance and support. Years later, as Sarah continued her work developing new generations of soldiers, she would often think back to that pivotal moment when Johnson lay crying on the training mat after their sparring session. The techniques that had defeated him were important, but the compassion she had shown him afterward was what had really changed everything. In that moment, she had demonstrated the fundamental truth that strength without mercy is merely brutality, while mercy without strength is merely weakness. The real victory had not been physical but moral, not in defeating an opponent, but in transforming an enemy into an ally. This lesson, learned through years of military service and personal struggle, had become the foundation of everything she taught to new recruits. True warriors were not those who could inflict the most damage, but those who could build the strongest teams, develop the best leaders, and create the most positive change in the world around them. Training Company Delta's legacy continued long after its members scattered to assignments around the world. The bonds formed during those transformative months at Fort Jackson remained strong, and the lessons learned about leadership, character, and service influenced everything they did in their subsequent careers. Many of them went on to become exceptional leaders themselves, carrying forward the principles they had learned and passing them on to the next generation of soldiers. Sarah's story became part of Fort Jackson's unofficial history, told and retold by instructors who wanted to illustrate the potential for growth and transformation that exists within every training cycle. The woman who had once been dismissed as too old, too different, and too weak had proven that real strength comes from character, real leadership comes from service, and real victory comes from building others up rather than tearing them down. The mockery that had once seemed so painful and destructive had ultimately become the catalyst for one of the most successful training companies in Fort Jackson's history. Sometimes, the greatest victories are won not through conflict, but through the courage to respond to cruelty with compassion, to meet ignorance with wisdom, and to transform enemies into allies through the simple power of treating others with dignity and respect.